Have you ever been backed into a corner by a golden boy boss who used you as a scapegoat for a mistake that cost millions of dollars? They handed me a script, pointed a camera at my face, and demanded my absolute professional surrender on a corporate broadcast. They thought I was just a desperate middle manager clinging to a paycheck, but the exact moment they tried to force an apology out of me, they handed me the perfect microphone to dismantle their entire fraudulent empire. Hello to all our wonderful listeners at Boss Revenge Stories. Recently, YouTube disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. So if you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to survive and keep creating these stories for you. You can support us by scanning the donation QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment below. My name is Quinn Howard. I am 34 years old, and until recently, I was the head of quality assurance at Ethelgard Biosciences, a rapidly rising star in the Boston biotech scene. I am not a loud person. I have always lived by strict, unyielding principles, preferring the cold, hard certainty of data over the messy politics of corporate life. For years, I was the silent cleaner of the company, the one who quietly swept up the messes left behind by ambitious executives and ensured that our products were completely safe before they ever reached the market. The air at Ethelgard was always heavy and suffocating. It was a high-pressure environment of sterile white walls, humming servers, and the unspoken expectation that you must sacrifice every waking hour for the sake of the next quarter's profit margins. Then came Julian Vance. He was our newly appointed vice president of supply chain, a slick, overgelled transplant fresh out of Silicon Valley. Julian did not know the first thing about biotechnology or the rigid regulatory landscape of pharmaceuticals. He spoke entirely in hollow buzzwords, constantly talking about disrupting the paradigm, leveraging synergies, and pushing the envelope. He viewed my strict safety protocols not as core requirements to keep people alive, but as annoying red tape slowing down his fast track to a higher executive position. He walked through our clean rooms in tailored suits, looking at my team with thin, mocking smiles, completely dismissing the science that kept the company running. The quiet friction between us escalated into an active, invisible war when Ethelgard landed a massive government contract worth tens of millions of dollars. The delivery timeline they promised was brutally tight. Julian was relentless. He constantly breathed down my neck, demanding that I cut the mandatory temperature stabilization testing phases in half to expedite the shipping schedule. "We need to be agile, Quinn," he would say, leaning against the glass of my office door, flashing his expensive, arrogant teeth. "Agile does not apply to federal compliance. Julian," I would reply calmly, never breaking eye contact. I held my ground against his bullying, forcing his supply chain team to wait the mandatory 48 hours for every single batch to clear safety checks. He hated me for it, and the resentment in his eyes grew darker with every passing week. But Julian was not a man who accepted any form of resistance. The catastrophe happened during the final week of the month. We were shipping our most fragile, temperature-sensitive vaccine batch to date. It required a constant, unbroken cold chain environment from our loading dock to the buyer's facility. To get around my oversight and rush the delivery to pad his monthly metrics, Julian made an executive call entirely off the books. He ordered the logistics crew to shut off the backup cooling generators on the transport trucks. His justification, which I later discovered hidden in a deleted logistical memo, was to save fuel and optimize operating costs. It was an act of staggering, reckless arrogance. Predictably, the primary system failed on one of the long-haul trucks. Without the backup cooling running, an entire shipment of life-saving medicine baked in the afternoon heat. The biological integrity of the vaccines was destroyed in less than 3 hours. Instead of flagging the destroyed inventory as scrap, reporting the temperature deviation to my department, and taking the massive financial hit, Julian panicked. He engaged in a frantic, illegal cover-up to save his own skin. He secretly diverted the spoiled cargo to a shady secondary wholesale distributor, effectively pushing useless, degraded vaccines into the gray market. To completely hide his tracks, he bypassed the quality assurance portal entirely and forged the final evaluation reports, illegally clearing the dead batch for commercial sale under his own authority. He thought he had outsmarted the system, treating pharmaceutical distribution like it was just moving cheap electronics out of a warehouse. It did not take long for his arrogance to catch up with reality. The secondary buyer tested the product, realized the proteins were completely denatured, immediately rejected the shipment, and threatened Ethelgard with a massive, highly public lawsuit. The board of directors was sent into an absolute panic. Tens of millions of dollars were suddenly on the line, along with the very survival of the company's reputation. Knowing his career was on the chopping block, Julian struck first. Before I was even made aware that the shipment had been rejected, he submitted an emergency incident report directly to the executive suite. He lied flawlessly. He claimed that his logistics team had done everything perfectly according to protocol, but that my automated quality assurance warning system had critically malfunctioned. He painted a vivid, damning picture where I was grossly negligent, claiming that my supposed software failure had blinded his drivers to the rising heat in the trailer. In the span of a single afternoon, Julian Vance manipulated the narrative and transformed me from the most reliable manager in the building into the sole scapegoat for a catastrophic failure. The email arrived precisely at 9:15 in the morning. It was a calendar invite titled, simply, Leadership Alignment Discussion. There was no agenda attached. The location was the transparent glass conference room at the very end of the executive hallway, known among the general staff as the interrogation box. It was a room designed specifically for psychological intimidation. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the entire open-plan office. Everyone outside could see you sitting there, but the absolute soundproofing ensured no one could hear a single word. You were completely isolated, displayed like a specimen in a jar for the rest of the company to witness. I walked in to find 3 people already seated and waiting for my arrival. The Director of Human Resources was positioned at the head of the polished mahogany table, her hands neatly folded over a leather-bound notepad. The head of Legal sat to her right, staring blankly at the screen of his phone, his posture stiff and adversarial. And then there was Julian. He was sitting directly across from my empty chair, leaning back with one ankle casually crossed over his knee. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit and an expression of tragic, highly practiced sympathy. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, sealing the room. The silence was immediate and deafening, broken only by the soft, sterile hum of the overhead ventilation system. "Quinn, please, take a seat," the Human Resources Director said. Her voice was dipped in honey, dripping with that weaponized corporate empathy designed to disarm you right before they slide the knife between your ribs. I sat down slowly. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting quietly in my lap, betraying absolutely nothing. "It has been a very challenging 48 hours for the entire Ethelgard family," she continued, offering a sad, tight smile that did not reach her cold eyes. "We are facing a significant public relations headwind and a potential crisis of partner confidence due to the recent transport failure. In times like this, our core values dictate that we must show radical transparency and accountability to our stakeholders." The head of legal finally looked up from his screen, without a single word of greeting. He slid a piece of heavy stock paper across the wide table toward me. "We have an all-hands virtual town hall scheduled for 2 o'clock this afternoon," he said, his tone entirely devoid of human warmth. "We need to calm the waters. The investors are getting nervous. We need a unified front. The executive board has prepared a brief statement for you to read." I picked up the paper. The text was double-spaced, printed in 12-point font. I read the words in silence, and with every sentence I digested, the architectural brilliance of their trap became glaringly clear. The script did not just ask me to apologize for a vague, collective mistake. It explicitly required me to state that I had failed to conduct proper maintenance on the automated sensor network, resulting in critical data being withheld from the logistics division. It was a forced confession of gross professional incompetence. By reading those exact words on a recorded company broadcast, I would hand them airtight legal grounds to terminate my employment with zero severance pay. I would be permanently blacklisted in the biotech industry. But more importantly, it would completely shield Julian and the executive board from any regulatory fallout. I would be officially painted as the lone rogue employee. I looked up from the page. Julian uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. He looked at me with a patronizing expression that made my stomach turn. "Quinn, I know this feels incredibly heavy," Julian said, his voice soft and persuasive. "But we have to look at the big picture here. Ethelgard is on the verge of securing Series C funding. If this shipping disaster turns into a prolonged blame game, the resulting media circus will tank our valuation by 20% or more overnight. We need you to take one for the team. Help us put out this fire today, and the company will remember your sacrifice." I looked back down at the paper, pretending to weigh his words. As my eyes scanned the final paragraph, my mind rapidly processed the structural protocols of our internal network. If I publicly admitted to gross negligence, our security protocol dictated an automatic revocation of my administrative network clearances. That was their true objective. They desperately wanted to strip my access to the internal digital signature vault. As the head of quality assurance, I held the highest level root access to that vault, an ironclad requirement mandated by the Federal Food and Drug Administration to ensure absolute data integrity. Julian knew that if my access was revoked, he could bring in friendly external tech contractors to quietly wipe the forged logistics approvals he had signed, deleting his digital footprints before the federal regulators ever caught wind of his crime. They needed me locked out, and they needed me to lock myself out voluntarily. The glass room was completely silent. The human resources director tilted her head. "Quinn, do we have your alignment on this path forward?" They expected fierce resistance. They expected me to cry, to shout, or to threaten a lawsuit while Julian played the victim. Instead, I took a slow, deep breath. The panic they were hoping to induce simply evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. I looked directly into Julian's eyes. I let a small, defeated smile touch the corners of my mouth. "I understand," I said softly, making sure my voice trembled just a fraction of an inch to sell the performance. "I see the big picture now. I will read the statement at 2:00. The relief in the room was palpable. Julian leaned back in his chair again, a smug, victorious grin finally breaking through his mask of fake sympathy. He thought he had broken me. He thought he had won the game. He had absolutely no idea what he had just given me permission to do. The virtual town hall commenced at precisely 2:00 in the afternoon. Sitting alone in my dimly lit home office, I watched the participant counter at the top left corner of the screen tick upward rapidly, eventually stalling at just over 500 active attendees. The interface displayed a massive grid of tiny muted squares, a digital mosaic of my colleagues, subordinates, and superiors. The executive board occupied the pinned video feeds at the very top. Among them was Julian, broadcasting from his pristine corner office. He was leaning back in his expensive ergonomic chair, a mug of artisanal coffee resting casually in one hand. His face was arranged into an expression of solemn concern, but the slight, predatory glimmer in his eyes betrayed his absolute triumph. He was ready for a show. He was ready to watch me break. The Director of Human Resources opened the session with a predictable preamble. Speaking in soft, measured tones about the unprecedented logistical challenges the company had faced over the past week. She talked about corporate integrity, the absolute necessity of taking ownership, and the painful process of learning from critical system failures. When she finally introduced me, she did so with a heavy sigh, passing the virtual microphone with all the theatrical sorrow of a judge delivering a death sentence. I leaned forward and unmuted my microphone. The tiny green light next to my webcam flared to life. I did not look defeated. I did not look like a woman whose career was about to be publicly executed. My posture was impeccably straight, my expression composed, and my voice perfectly steady. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began, the audio crisp and clear across the company network. I am speaking to you today to address the recent failure in our cold chain logistics network, which resulted in the loss of a highly valuable commercial shipment. I looked directly into the camera lens, projecting absolute calm. I could practically feel the confusion rippling through the executive feeds. They had expected a trembling voice. They had expected hesitation, perhaps even a few tears of humiliation. Instead, I sounded like a news anchor delivering the evening broadcast. I read their prepared script flawlessly for the first 2 paragraphs, accepting the blame for the automated sensor network failure. Julian took a slow sip of his coffee, nodding in magnanimous approval. But then, as I reached the critical final paragraph, I smoothly pivoted away from the printed text sitting on my desk. I kept my cadence completely uniform, ensuring the transition sounded like a natural professional expansion of the script. As the head of this department, I continued, my voice echoing in 500 different rooms across the city, I take full administrative responsibility for the software oversight. Furthermore, I am formally acknowledging the deviation under Title 21, CFR Part 11, regarding our electronic records and signature protocols. Because the integrity of the data cannot be internally guaranteed at this moment, I am actively accepting evaluation under Class A emergency procedure to ensure full compliance moving forward. I finished the statement, offered a polite, professional nod to the camera, and muted my microphone. On the grid, the executive simply nodded along. The director of human resources thanked me for my candor. Julian offered a tight, patronizing smile. Not a single person on that board had the deep, specialized regulatory knowledge required to understand what I had just said. To their untrained ears, I was merely using dense quality assurance jargon to sound thoroughly defeated and legally compliant. They heard big words and assumed I was falling on my sword with corporate dignity. They were completely wrong. Those were not corporate buzzwords. They were embedded legal tripwires. Title 21, CFR Part 11 is the federal regulation that governs how electronic records and digital signatures are treated by the government. By publicly stating that a deviation had occurred under that specific mandate, and by pairing it with the phrase, Class A emergency procedure on a globally recorded, company-wide broadcast, I had just executed a hard-coded verbal override. The compliance software that I had personally designed for Ethelgard was programmed to constantly monitor our communication archives for those exact compliance flags. By uttering those specific phrases, I automatically satisfied the mandatory legal criteria to trigger a federal whistleblower alert. I did not need to manually send an email or make a phone call. The moment the recording of this meeting was saved to the cloud, my automated system would package the audio file, encrypt it, and fire it directly into the automated audit queue of the federal regulators. I had just turned the company's own disciplinary broadcast into a sworn, legally binding distress beacon. The town hall concluded shortly after. The moment the broadcast ended, my company phone buzzed on the desk. It was a direct text message from Julian. "Good girl," the message read. "Take the weekend to clear your head. HR will reach out on Monday regarding your transition." I read the message, my face entirely devoid of emotion. I did not reply. I simply powered down my phone and placed it face down on the desk. He thought he had until Monday to wipe his tracks. He did not realize that the federal 48-hour countdown had already begun, and by Monday morning, this company would be a crater. When midnight arrived, my apartment was completely silent. I booted up my personal, encrypted laptop. The board had not revoked my administrative access yet. They needed the weekend to process the human resources paperwork. I utilized the remaining hours of my top-tier clearance to move like a ghost through the company servers. I bypassed Julian's basic security filters and initiated a massive, silent extraction protocol. I pulled the raw, unaltered temperature logs from the trucks. I secured the original, unstamped inventory manifests. I downloaded every single byte of reality before Julian's hired hands could replace it with fiction. The progress bar on my screen crept toward 100%, glowing brightly in the dark room, silently arming the bomb that would soon destroy them all. The digital clock on my bedside table read exactly 2:15 in the morning. The rest of the city outside my window was asleep, drowned in the quiet darkness of a Boston night. But my living room was illuminated by the harsh, cold glow of 3 computer monitors. The adrenaline pumping through my veins had completely erased any need for sleep. The 48-hour window was closing, and I needed absolute, irrefutable proof to ensure that when the hammer fell, it would completely shatter the executive suite. The board of directors believed they had neatly locked me in a box, assuming I was nothing more than a glorified paper pusher with a compliance manual. They did not realize that when I constructed Ethelgard Biosciences' internal compliance network over a year ago, I had built the very walls they were currently hiding behind. When you design a fortress, you always leave a key hidden under the digital doormat. I opened a secure terminal window and initiated the Shadow Protocol. During the initial implementation of the company network, I had embedded a silent, unlogged diagnostic backdoor deep within the server architecture. It was designed to bypass the standard authentication gateways. Originally intended as a failsafe in case a catastrophic system failure locked the quality assurance team out of the primary servers, now it was my private tunnel directly into the belly of the beast. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing lines of command prompts, moving silently past the corporate firewalls without triggering a single security alarm. I was a ghost haunting my own machine. My first target was the document revision history in the centralized logistics database. I needed to see exactly how Julian Vance had managed to force a condemned batch of vaccines out of the loading dock without triggering the automated quarantine lockdown. I navigated to the specific manifest for the ruined shipment, the screen populated with a long string of metadata, displaying the exact timeline of digital approvals. I narrowed my eyes, scanning the glowing green text. There, recorded at exactly 4:30 in the afternoon on the day of the shipment failure, was a final authorization stamp. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The signature on the digital clearance form was mine. Julian had not just ordered the backup cooling generators to be shut down. He had not just ignored the temperature warnings. When the primary system failed and the cargo was destroyed, he had actively logged into the administrative portal, hijacked a vulnerable session token, and spoofed my unique digital signature to manually override the quarantine protocol. He had committed outright identity theft and corporate forgery to clear a batch of dead biological material for commercial sale. It was a felony of the highest order. But criminals who rely on arrogance always leave a trail. Julian was a man who believed his executive title made him invincible, but he was entirely illiterate when it came to the foundational architecture of network security. He had forged my signature, but he had failed to mask his digital footprint. I pulled the raw connection logs attached to that specific authorization timestamp. The system displayed the exact internal routing address used to submit the fake signature. It did not match my desktop computer in the quality assurance lab. The numbers pointed directly to the dedicated, secure local area network assigned exclusively to the Vice President of Supply Chain. Julian had committed federal fraud from the comfort of his own corner office, leaving a glowing neon sign pointing right back to his leather chair. I exported the raw network logs, carefully hashing the files to prove they had not been altered, but the forged signature was only the first layer of the rot. I needed to know where the dead vaccines actually went. I pivoted my search, diving into the corporate financial ledger. I pulled the invoice for the secondary wholesale distributor that Julian had secretly contracted to purchase the rejected cargo. The buyer was listed as Apex Global Logistics, a company I had never seen on our approved vendor list. According to the internal billing system, Ethelgard had sold the degraded cargo to Apex at a staggeringly suspicious 90% discount, categorizing it as liquidated research material rather than commercial medicine. I minimized the secure terminal and opened a standard web browser. I navigated to the public registry of corporations for the state of Delaware, searching for the formation documents of Apex Global Logistics. The database returned a standard, generic shell company profile. It had been incorporated less than 6 months ago. There was no physical warehouse address, only a post office box located in a strip mall. But the critical piece of information was hidden in the listed registered agent. The name on the incorporation document was Richard Sterling. The name sounded vaguely familiar. I pulled up my personal smartphone and accessed a popular professional networking site. I searched for Julian Vance and scrolled through his public connections, cross-referencing the last name. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the missing link. Richard Sterling was not some anonymous gray market distributor. He was Julian's brother-in-law. The sheer audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together in my mind, revealing a conspiracy far darker than simple negligence. Julian had deliberately sold the ruined shipment to a dummy corporation owned by his own family member for pennies on the dollar. The plan was devastatingly simple. Apex Global Logistics would claim they purchased the batch in good faith, discover the temperature damage, and then file a massive commercial insurance claim for the full market value of the medicine. Julian and his brother-in-law were using Ethelgard Biosciences as an unwitting vehicle to launder millions of dollars through insurance fraud. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from the raw, intoxicating thrill of absolute victory. I had everything. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously packaging the explosive payload. I created a secure, heavily encrypted zip file. Inside, I placed the raw, unaltered temperature logs proving the vaccines were destroyed on the truck. I added the network routing evidence proving Julian had forged my digital signature to bypass the safety protocols. Finally, I included the state registry documents and the financial invoices linking the corrupt executive directly to the fraudulent shell company. I did not send this package to the Ethelgard board of directors. They had already proven they were perfectly willing to burn me at the stake to protect their stock valuation. I opened a specialized, encrypted browser designed to access the deep web anonymously. I navigated to the official whistleblower reporting portal for the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. The portal was a one-way street. Once the data was uploaded, it could not be recalled, deleted, or intercepted by any corporate lawyers. I filled out the digital submission form, explicitly linking my evidence package to the automated federal alert I had verbally triggered during the town hall meeting yesterday afternoon. I attached the encrypted zip file. I hovered my mouse over the final submit button. The apartment was completely silent. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the moment, and clicked the mouse. The upload bar raced across the screen, hitting 100%. A green confirmation number appeared. The missile had left the silo. There was no turning back. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Boston skyline, painting the clouds in bruised shades of purple and gold. I closed my laptop, took a hot shower, and put on my sharpest charcoal blazer. At exactly 8:45 in the morning, I walked through the sliding glass doors of Ethelgard Biosciences. The office was bustling with the usual Friday morning energy. Analysts were chatting by the water coolers. Executives were rushing to early strategy meetings, and the gentle hum of the ventilation system masked the invisible countdown ticking down to 0. I walked calmly to my desk in the quality assurance department. I set my bag down, booted up my workstation, and walked to the break room to pour myself a cup of black coffee. I returned to my desk, took a slow, satisfying sip from my ceramic mug, and looked out across the open floor toward the executive suites. Julian was in his office, laughing on his cell phone, completely oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath his feet no longer existed. I simply sat there, perfectly still, waiting for the federal system to react. The digital clock in the corner of my primary monitor shifted to exactly 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday. The trap officially sprang. I did not need to be in the executive suite to know it had happened. I felt the tectonic shift in the office atmosphere almost immediately. Down the main hallway, the heavy oak door of the legal department burst open with terrifying violence. The head of legal sprinted out into the open floor, his face completely drained of blood. He was clutching a printed sheet of paper as if it were a live grenade, his eyes wide with unadulterated panic. He had just received an automated, priority communication directly from the Food and Drug Administration. The subject line, which I had hard-coded to trigger through my backdoor protocol, declared an immediate comprehensive compliance inspection. The body of the email explicitly cited credible digital evidence of federal record forgery and deliberate tampering with commercial biological distribution protocols. Absolute pandemonium erupted on the management floor. From the quiet sanctuary of my desk, I watched through the transparent glass walls as the executives scrambled like rats trapped in a burning maze. Julian darted out of his pristine corner office, his usual polished demeanor entirely shattered. His expensive silk tie was loosened, his perfectly styled hair was a frantic mess, and he was shouting hysterically into his mobile phone. He was barking desperate orders at the head of the information technology department, demanding that they immediately initiate a catastrophic, physical wipe of the primary storage servers. He wanted every single byte of data from the past 7 days permanently incinerated. He actually believed he could burn the entire digital house down to hide the bodies. But the fire suppression system was already active. 5 minutes later, the head of information technology practically ran into the executive suite, physically shaking his head in terror. I watched his hands waving frantically in the air as he explained the impossible reality to a furious Julian. The technical support team had entirely lost root access to their own corporate network. When they attempted to initialize the emergency wipe, the administrative dashboard had locked them out completely, flashing a stark red error message across every single screen in their department. The prompt was short and undeniable. It read, "System quarantine active. Locked by Federal Liaison Officer Quinn Howard." Julian realized he was trapped in a cage of his own making. His panic instantly mutated into blind, uncontrollable rage. My desk phone rang harshly. It was the Director of Human Resources. Her voice was trembling violently, completely stripped of its usual sickening corporate sweetness. She did not ask. She demanded that I report to the glass conference room immediately. I picked up my laptop, took one last, slow sip of my black coffee, and walked down the hallway at a leisurely, measured pace. I did not rush. I let them marinate in their escalating terror. When I finally pushed open the heavy glass door, the room smelled distinctly of stale sweat and primal fear. The chief executive officer had joined them, looking violently ill as he gripped the edge of the table. The head of legal was pacing relentlessly, muttering under his breath. Julian was standing at the head of the mahogany table. His face flushed a dangerous, explosive shade of crimson. "Unlock the servers right now!" Julian screamed the exact second I stepped inside, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. He slammed both of his clenched fists down onto the polished wood so hard the table groaned. "You think you are clever, Quinn? You think you can hold this entire corporation hostage over a bruised ego? I will completely ruin you. I will make sure you never work a single day in the United States again. I will bury you under so many corporate defamation lawsuits your grandchildren will still be paying them off. Unlock the goddamn network before I call security and have you physically thrown out of this building." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked calmly to the center of the room, plugged my laptop into the primary presentation cable on the table, and tapped the spacebar. The massive screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. I did not show them a network key. I projected a high-resolution screenshot of the financial routing logs I had captured in the middle of the night. It clearly displayed Julian using his dedicated executive terminal to wire company funds and transfer the condemned medical assets directly to Apex Global Logistics. Right next to it, I projected the state incorporation documents proving without a shadow of a doubt that the dummy corporation was owned by his brother-in-law. The silence that fell over the glass room was absolute and suffocating. The chief executive officer stopped breathing, his eyes bulging out of his head. The head of legal stopped pacing, freezing in his tracks as if he had just stepped on a landmine. Julian stared at the glowing screen, his mouth hanging open in dumbfounded horror. The color completely drained from his face as his entire fraudulent empire crumbled into dust in front of his eyes. "My apology yesterday was not a confession," I said, my voice cutting through the dead, heavy air like a surgical scalpel. "It was a formalized, legal public violation report. By forcing me to read that exact script on a recorded company network, you provided me with the undeniable platform to trigger a federal whistleblower alert. The Food and Drug Administration and the Securities and Exchange Commission already have everything you see on this screen, plus the original temperature logs proving you deliberately shipped dead vaccines. I gracefully closed my laptop and looked directly at the Chief Executive Officer, who was currently clutching his chest as if he were experiencing a massive cardiac event. I am now officially recognized as a protected federal witness, I continued, speaking with the cold, unwavering authority of an executioner. The servers are locked under strict federal mandate. If any of you attempt to touch me, fire me, intimidate me, or order a network wipe from this moment forward, you will no longer be dealing with human resources. You will be committing textbook obstruction of federal justice, which carries a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. The psychological shift in the room was instantaneous, visceral, and incredibly brutal. The fragile facade of corporate unity completely evaporated in less than a second. The Chief Executive Officer turned his gaze slowly toward Julian. It was the terrifying look of a starving wolf staring at a wounded deer. "You told me this was a software glitch," the Chief Executive Officer whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of profound shock and homicidal fury. "You looked me in the eye and told me she was responsible. You sold our commercial assets to your own family?" "It is not what it looks like," Julian stammered pathetically, stepping backward, his hands raised defensively in the air. His polished, arrogant bravado was entirely gone, replaced by the pathetic, desperate whimpering of a cornered criminal. "I was trying to optimize the quarterly losses. I was protecting the Series C funding round." "You forged federal documents!" the head of legal shrieked, entirely losing his professional composure. He lunged across the wide table, pointing a violently shaking finger directly at Julian's pale face. "You used her digital signature. You committed wire fraud. You just dragged the entire executive board into a felony criminal conspiracy. You absolute idiot!" They began to tear each other to pieces right there in the fishbowl. The Director of Human Resources started sobbing uncontrollably, burying her face in her hands, as she realized her direct role in forcing my fake confession made her an active, documented accomplice to the cover-up. The Chief Executive Officer lunged forward and grabbed Julian by the collar of his expensive Navy suit, screaming obscenities at the top of his lungs, demanding to know exactly how much money he had stolen from the investors. They were no longer a civilized board of directors. They were a pack of desperate, terrified animals, turning on their weakest link to save their own skin. I stood quietly by the glass door, watching the corporate carnage unfold with absolute, unadulterated satisfaction. I had not just beaten them at their own game, I had handed them the weapons and forced them to eat each other alive. Despite the absolute chaos that had consumed the glass room, the instinct of corporate self-preservation is a powerful, venomous thing. By noon, the Chief Executive Officer had somehow managed to wrangle the terrified executives into the main boardroom for an emergency, closed-door session. They were desperately trying to assemble one final, lethal strike. From my seat at the far end of the room, I watched Julian pace back and forth. Remarkably, he had managed to stitch a thin, fragile layer of his false bravado back together. He stood at the head of the massive oak table, aggressively adjusting his silk tie, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "We have the best corporate defense attorneys in the entire country," Julian declared, his voice dripping with a desperate, unhinged arrogance. "These lawyers charge $1,000 an hour for a reason. We draft an immediate termination order right now. We fire her with cause this very second. We release a public statement framing her as a disgruntled, rogue employee who maliciously manipulated the internal servers to extort the company. By the time the federal regulators actually figure out what is real and what is fabricated, our legal team will have her buried so deep under civil injunctions she will not even be able to afford a bus ticket, let alone a defense attorney." The head of legal, sweating profusely and breathing heavily, began passing around the hastily printed termination documents. They were actually going to do it. The board of directors was preparing to vote to utterly destroy my life in a pathetic attempt to save their dying, corrupt empire. But they never got the chance to raise their hands. Precisely as the Chief Executive Officer opened his mouth to call for the official vote, the heavy double doors of the boardroom did not just open, They were violently pushed apart, slamming against the adjacent walls with a deafening crash. It was not the Human Resources Department. It was a tactical team of federal agents, wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed boldly across the back. They were closely flanked by 3 senior inspectors from the Food and Drug Administration. Their arrival at that exact second was not a coincidence. When I originally set up the automated whistleblower protocol, I had hard-coded the precise geographical coordinates of the executive suite and a specific chronological trigger designed to perfectly coordinate with the local federal field office. The lead agent stepped into the room, holding up a thick stack of authorized papers. "We are executing a federal search and seizure warrant for this entire premises," he announced, his voice booming like thunder in the stunned, silent room. "Nobody touch a keyboard. Step away from the table immediately." I slowly stood up from my chair. The executives were frozen in place like stone statues. Julian's face had lost every single drop of color. He looked exactly like a corpse standing upright. I reached up, unclipped my corporate identification badge, and dropped it onto the polished oak table. The plastic echoed with a sharp, final crack. I walked smoothly over to the lead agent and pulled a small, encrypted silver flash drive from my blazer pocket. "This contains the uncorrupted master decryption keys, the original server source code, and the verified financial routing logs," I said calmly, handing the drive over to him. "Everything you need to secure the network is right there." I turned to look at Julian one last time. He could not even speak. His jaw trembled silently as 2 agents moved swiftly toward him, forcefully turning him around and clicking heavy steel handcuffs over his wrists. He was being arrested on the spot for federal wire fraud, corporate espionage, and the deliberate endangerment of public health. Ethelgard Biosciences did not survive the weekend. By Monday morning, federal regulators indefinitely suspended all of their commercial operations pending a massive criminal investigation. The company's stock price hit absolute zero, completely wiping out the fortunes of the board of directors. But I was not there to see the final ashes fall. That Friday afternoon, I walked out of the towering glass skyscraper and stepped onto the busy Boston sidewalk. The late afternoon sun felt incredibly warm against my skin. I took a long, deep breath of the crisp city air. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of the corporate machine was completely gone from my shoulders. I was free, I was clean, and I had successfully burned their empire to the ground. Thank you so much to everyone tuning in to Boss Revenge Stories today. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. As we mentioned earlier, since YouTube removed our monetization, we rely entirely on your incredible support. If you enjoyed today's story and felt that justice was truly served, please consider helping us with just $1. Your kindness allows us to pay our dedicated staff so they can support their families and continue bringing you these satisfying tales. You can easily support us by scanning the donation QR code on your screen or by using the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you for standing with us.